The notification sound from Emma Parker's laptop cut through the silence of her apartment at 3:34 a.m. on October 13, 2017. She had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, dreading this date as she did every year. 14 years. 14 years since her sister Madison had simply vanished from their childhood home in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Emma rolled over and squinted at her screen, expecting another late-night email or social media notification. Instead, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice, a MySpace notification in 2017. That alone would have been strange enough, but what she saw next defied all logic. Madison Parker has updated her profile picture. Emma's hands trembled as she clicked on the notification. Madison's MySpace page, which had remained unchanged since 2003, still showed her as the bright-eyed 15-year-old she had been when she disappeared. The page was exactly as Emma remembered it. Pink background with glittery graphics, her top 8 friends list and song lyrics in her about section from some emo band she had loved. But the profile picture was different. Impossibly different. The new image showed a woman who looked exactly like Madison would have looked now, at 29. She stood in what appeared to be the same bedroom from the original photo, but everything was wrong. The walls were peeling, covered in a strange dark mold that seemed to move in the image. The cheerful posters had been replaced by shadows that looked almost like figures, and Madison herself looked hollow, her eyes sunken and her skin pale as moonlight. The timestamp showed the photo had been uploaded at exactly 3:33 a.m., 1 minute before Emma received the notification. Emma's first instinct was to call the police, but she knew how it would sound. A MySpace profile updating itself? They would think she was having some kind of breakdown related to the anniversary of Madison's disappearance. Instead, she grabbed her phone and called the one person who might believe her. "Detective Chen, it's Emma Parker. I know it's late, but something's happened. Something about Madison." Sarah Chen had been expecting this call. Every year on October 13th, Emma would reach out, sometimes with new theories, sometimes just needing someone to talk to who understood. Sarah had been a rookie officer when Madison disappeared, and the case had haunted her throughout her career. "What is it, Emma?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her clothes. "Her MySpace profile. It changed. The picture changed." Sarah paused. In all the years she had known Emma, she had never sounded like this, equal parts terrified and excited. "I'm coming over. Don't touch anything on that computer." As Sarah drove through the empty streets of Cedar Falls, she couldn't shake the feeling that this anniversary would be different. The town looked the same as it always did in the pre-dawn hours. Small houses with perfectly maintained lawns, the old courthouse clock tower visible in the distance, everything peaceful and normal. But there was something in the air tonight, something that made her skin crawl. When she arrived at Emma's apartment, she found the young woman sitting in front of her laptop, afraid to look at the screen but unable to look away. "Show me," Sarah said gently. Emma turned the laptop toward her, and Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. She had seen the original MySpace profile countless times during the investigation. This was definitely not the same photo. When exactly did this happen? 3:33 a.m. I got the notification at 3:34. Sarah studied the image more closely. The woman in the photo definitely looked like an aged version of Madison, but there was something else. Something in the background of the room that didn't belong. "Emma, do you see that? In the corner of the room, behind her?" Emma leaned closer. There, barely visible in the shadows, was what looked like a figure. Small, childlike, but the features were indistinct, as if the image was deliberately obscured. "That's not possible," Emma whispered. "Madison's room never looked like that. And who is that in the background?" Sarah took screenshots of the page, her mind racing. In 14 years of police work, she had never encountered anything like this. But she also knew that in the age of digital manipulation, almost anything was possible. "I need you to think carefully, Emma. Has anyone had access to this account? Any old passwords? Anyone who might want to play a cruel joke?" Emma shook her head. No one knew the password except Madison. And even if they did, how would they know what she would look like now? How would they age her face so perfectly? Sarah had to admit it was a good point. The photo showed an uncanny progression of Madison's features, as if she had actually aged 14 years. But that was impossible, wasn't it? As the first hints of dawn began to creep through Emma's apartment windows, both women stared at the screen, neither willing to voice what they were both thinking. After 14 years of silence, Madison Parker had somehow reached out from wherever she was, and she looked like she was in hell. By 7 a.m., Sarah had called in a favor with the department's cybercrime unit. Detective Mike Rodriguez arrived at Emma's apartment with a laptop bag full of equipment and a skeptical expression that quickly faded when he saw the MySpace profile. "This is unusual," he admitted, connecting various devices to Emma's laptop. The metadata shows the image was uploaded from an IP address that doesn't exist anymore. It was registered to a house on Maple Street that was demolished in 2009. Emma felt her stomach drop. "What address on Maple Street?" Mike checked his screen. 1247 Maple Street. Sarah and Emma exchanged a look. Madison had mentioned that address in her diary entries from 2003. She had been fascinated by the old Victorian house, claiming it was haunted. Emma remembered their parents forbidding Madison from going near the property after she had been caught trespassing there twice. "We need to go to the library," Emma said suddenly. Madison was researching that house before she disappeared. She left notes. The Cedar Falls Public Library still kept archives from 2003, stored in dusty boxes in the basement. Emma had donated Madison's research materials years ago, unable to bear keeping them, but unwilling to throw them away. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, remembered the donation and led them to the correct box. Inside, they found Madison's handwritten notes, printed internet articles from early 2000s websites, and photocopied newspaper clippings. Her 15-year-old handwriting filled notebook after notebook with increasingly frantic research about 1247 Maple Street. "Listen to this," Emma said, reading from one of Madison's notebooks. "The house was built in 1897 by Edmund Blackwood, a wealthy merchant. In 1903, his daughter Clara, age 15, disappeared from her bedroom on October 13th. Her body was never found, but neighbors reported seeing lights in her room for weeks after the disappearance." Sarah leaned forward. "October 13th. That's the same date Madison disappeared." Emma continued reading. "In 1923, another girl disappeared. Mary Sullivan, age 15, also on October 13th. Same in 1943, Janet Mills. In 1963, Susan Carter. In 1983, Lisa Thompson." Emma's voice grew quiet. "Madison wrote that every 20 years on October 13th, a 15-year-old girl disappears in Cedar Falls. She thought she was next." Mike looked up from his laptop. "So she knew she was in danger." "It gets worse," Emma said, flipping through more pages. "Madison believed the disappearances were connected to something she called the threshold. She wrote about the house being a gateway and how the missing girls were somehow trapped there, aging in some kind of liminal space." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Emma, look at the timeline. If Madison was right about the 20-year pattern, the next disappearance would be 2023, Emma whispered. 6 years from now." "But why is the profile updating now?" Mike asked. "What's special about 2017? Emma flipped to the last entry in Madison's notebook, dated October 12, 2003, the day before she disappeared. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. "I understand now. The threshold isn't just about taking girls. It's about communication. Every 14 years they can reach through. Tomorrow I disappear, but in 14 years I can send a message. I have to warn whoever comes next. The pattern is breaking. He's getting stronger." The room fell silent. Outside the library windows, ordinary life in Cedar Falls continued. People walking their dogs, children heading to school, traffic moving slowly down Main Street. But inside the dusty basement, surrounded by Madison's desperate research, reality felt fragmented. "We need to go to where the house used to be," Sarah said finally. The lot at 1247 Maple Street was now a small park with a playground and a memorial bench. Nothing remained of the Victorian house except for the original foundation stones, partially visible through the grass. Emma knelt beside the stones, running her fingers along the weathered edges. "Madison used to sit right here," she said. "Even after the house was torn down, she would come here and just stare at the ground." Mike was scanning the area with his equipment. "I'm picking up some kind of electromagnetic anomaly. It's centered right where the house's foundation would have been." Sarah examined the memorial bench. The plaque read, "In memory of those we have lost," with no specific names or dates. "Who installed this bench?" Emma shrugged. "It's been here as long as I can remember. Maybe the city?" But when Sarah called City Hall, there was no record of the bench installation, no permits, no purchase orders, no maintenance schedules. It had simply appeared sometime after the house was demolished, and everyone had accepted it, as if it had always been there. As they prepared to leave, Emma noticed something strange about the playground. "Sarah, look at this." The swing set had 5 swings, but only 4 were moving gently in the breeze. The middle swing hung perfectly still, despite the wind that moved the others. Mike pointed his EMF detector at the stationary swing. The device went crazy, beeping frantically as the needle swung to its maximum reading. "That's impossible," he muttered. "There's nothing here that should cause this kind of electromagnetic activity." As if responding to his words, the still swing began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing intensity, as if pushed by invisible hands. The other swings gradually stopped moving until only the middle one continued its rhythmic back-and-forth motion. Emma backed away from the playground. "We need to leave now." But as they walked back to their cars, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She turned back toward the park and froze. There, sitting on the memorial bench, was the shadow of a young woman, just for a moment barely visible in the afternoon light, but unmistakably there. When Sarah blinked, the shadow was gone, but the bench was warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. The investigation was no longer just about a mysterious MySpace update. They were dealing with something that had been building in Cedar Falls for over a century, and Madison's disappearance was just one piece of a much larger, much more terrifying puzzle. That evening, Sarah returned to the police station to review the original case files. The Cedar Falls Police Department had kept detailed records of Madison's disappearance, but reading them now with new context made Sarah's skin crawl. Details she had dismissed as irrelevant 14 years ago suddenly seemed crucial. Madison's parents had reported her missing when they found her bedroom window open and her bed empty on the morning of October 14, 2003. But what Sarah had forgotten was the state of the room itself. According to the initial report, Madison's bedroom had been ice cold, despite the heating system working perfectly in the rest of the house. The walls had been covered in condensation, and there had been a strange smell, like old roses mixed with decay. More disturbing was the testimony from Madison's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, Sarah's own grandmother, who had lived next door to the Parker family. She had reported seeing Madison's bedroom light flickering on and off in a pattern at exactly 3:33 a.m. on October 13th. When questioned further, Mrs. Chen had insisted she saw a figure in the window, but it wasn't Madison. It was taller, older, with long dark hair. Sarah had dismissed this at the time as an elderly woman's confusion, but now she wondered if her grandmother had actually seen the grown-up version of Madison, the same woman from the MySpace photo. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Emma, and she sounded terrified. "Sarah, something's happening to the profile. You need to get over here right now." When Sarah arrived at Emma's apartment, she found both Emma and Mike staring at the laptop screen in horror. Madison's MySpace profile was changing in real time. New photos were appearing in her album, one by one, each showing the same aged version of Madison in different locations around Cedar Falls. Madison standing in front of the old courthouse, Madison in the cemetery behind St. Mary's Church, Madison in the woods near the high school. Each image showed her looking directly at the camera with those hollow, haunting eyes, but most disturbing of all, in each photo, she was holding up fingers. In the courthouse photo, 1 finger. In the cemetery photo, 2 fingers. In the woods, 3 fingers. "It's like a countdown," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. As they watched, a 4th photo appeared. Madison standing in what looked like the basement of a house, holding up 4 fingers. Behind her, Emma could see shelves lined with old jars, and in those jars, "Are those photographs?" Emma leaned closer to the screen. Sarah squinted at the image. The jars indeed seemed to contain old photographs, dozens of them, floating in some kind of liquid, and if she looked closely enough she could make out faces in those photos. Young faces, girls' faces. A 5th photo appeared. This one was different. It showed Madison standing in Emma's apartment, taken from the perspective of someone standing right behind where they were sitting now. In the photo, Emma, Sarah, and Mike could be seen hunched over the laptop, completely unaware they were being watched. Emma spun around, but the apartment was empty. Sarah drew her weapon, motioning for the others to stay back as she checked every room. Nothing. No one could have taken that photo without them knowing. When they returned to the laptop, a 6th photo had been uploaded. Madison standing in the police station, specifically in Sarah's office, holding up 6 fingers. On Sarah's desk in the photo was a file folder that wasn't there when Sarah had left an hour ago. "We need to get to the station," Sarah said. The Cedar Falls Police Department was nearly empty at 9 p.m. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the hallway as she made her way to her office, Emma and Mike close behind. Her office looked exactly as she had left it, except for one thing. There was indeed a file folder on her desk that hadn't been there before. The folder was old, made of yellowed manila paper, and it smelled like roses and decay. Inside, Sarah found 5 missing person reports, each one detailing the disappearance of a 15-year-old girl on October 13th, spanning from 1903 to 1983. These weren't copies of the reports. They were the originals, despite the fact that some of them should have been over a century old. Each report contained details that had never been made public. Clara Blackwood in 1903 had left behind a diary entry about voices calling her name from the cellar. Mary Sullivan in 1923 had been found sleepwalking 3 times in the weeks before her disappearance, always heading toward Maple Street. Janet Mills in 1943 had told her sister about dreams of standing in a room full of mirrors, unable to find her way out. Susan Carter in 1963 had developed an obsession with photography, specifically taking pictures of empty rooms that somehow showed figures when the film was developed. Lisa Thompson in 1983 had claimed she could hear other girls crying in the walls of her house. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note in Madison's 15-year-old handwriting. The threshold isn't just between life and death, it's between when and now. We're all still here, just in the wrong time. He feeds on the separation, on the longing to return, but I found a way to reach through. The others are teaching me. We can warn you, but you have to listen. Emma's phone buzzed. Another MySpace notification. The 7th photo showed Madison standing in the police station parking lot, holding up 7 fingers. She was looking directly at the building's entrance, as if waiting for them to come out. "She's here," Emma whispered. "She's actually here right now." Sarah looked out the window toward the parking lot. It was empty except for their 3 cars under the streetlights. No sign of Madison or anyone else. But as they watched, the streetlight nearest to where Madison had been standing in the photo began to flicker, on and off, in a deliberate pattern. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. SOS. Mike checked his laptop. An 8th photo just uploaded. This one showed Madison inside the police station, standing at the front desk. She was holding up 8 fingers, but her expression had changed. For the first time, she looked afraid. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows of the hallway, were other figures. Young women, all appearing to be teenagers, all with the same hollow eyes and desperate expressions, and they were all pointing toward the basement of the police station. Sarah had never given much thought to the basement of the building. It was used mostly for storage, old files, and equipment, but now she realized she couldn't remember the last time anyone had actually gone down there. As if reading her thoughts, Emma said, "We have to go down there, don't we?" Sarah nodded grimly, but not alone, and not unarmed. As they prepared to descend into the basement of the police station, none of them could have imagined what they would find. The countdown was approaching its end, and Madison's desperate attempts to communicate from beyond the threshold were about to reveal a truth that had been hidden beneath Cedar Falls for over a century. The basement of the Cedar Falls Police Department hadn't been properly explored in decades. As Sarah led the way down the narrow staircase, her flashlight beam revealed concrete walls covered in decades of dust and neglect. The air grew colder with each step, and that familiar smell, roses mixed with decay, grew stronger. "Jesus," Mike muttered, checking his EMF detector. "The readings down here are off the charts." The basement was larger than Sarah had expected, extending far beyond what should have been possible given the building's footprint. Old filing cabinets lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood something that shouldn't have been there. A large, ornate mirror in a Victorian frame, easily 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. Emma approached the mirror cautiously. "This looks like it belongs in a house, not a police station basement." Sarah examined the frame more closely. Carved into the dark wood were names and dates. Clara Blackwood, 1903, Mary Sullivan, 1923, Janet Mills, 1943, Susan Carter, 1963, Lisa Thompson, 1983, and at the bottom, fresher than the others, Madison Parker, 2003. "It's like a memorial," Sarah said. "But how did this get here?" Mike's laptop chimed. 9th photo just came through. In this image, Madison stood directly in front of the mirror, holding up 9 fingers. But in the reflection behind her, instead of showing Mike, Sarah, and Emma as it should have, the mirror reflected a completely different scene. It showed a grand Victorian parlor with 5 young women sitting in chairs, all wearing clothes from different eras, and they were all looking directly out of the mirror, as if they could see into the basement. Emma stepped closer to the actual mirror in front of them. Her reflection looked normal, but as she stared, she began to see subtle changes. The basement behind her reflection gradually shifted, walls becoming papered with faded roses, the concrete floor transforming into polished hardwood. "Emma, step away from the mirror," Sarah warned. But Emma was transfixed. "I can see them. They're all here. Madison's with them." In Emma's reflection, the Victorian parlor was now clearly visible. Madison sat in the center chair, looking exactly as she had in the MySpace photos. The other missing girls surrounded her, Clara in her 1903 dress, Mary in 1920s fashion, Janet in 1940s clothing, Susan in 1960s style, and Lisa in 1980s attire. They were all trying to speak, their mouths moving urgently, but no sound came through. Sarah grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her back from the mirror. The moment Emma broke eye contact with her reflection, the parlor scene vanished, replaced by the normal basement reflection. "They're trapped in there," Emma said, her voice shaking. "All of them. They're trying to tell us something." Mike's laptop chimed again. 10th photo. This one showed the Victorian parlor from a different angle, revealing more of the room. In the background, barely visible in the shadows, was a tall figure in a dark suit. His face wasn't clear, but his presence seemed to fill the room with menace. "Edmund Blackwood," Emma whispered, remembering Madison's research. "The man who built the original house." Sarah studied the image. If Madison was right about him getting stronger, about the pattern breaking— "Emma, when did you say the next girl was supposed to disappear?" 2023, but that's 6 years away. What if the timeline is accelerating? What if he's not waiting 20 years anymore? As if responding to her words, the mirror began to glow with a soft, cold light. The reflection showed the parlor again, but now all 6 girls were standing, pressing their hands against what appeared to be the backside of the mirror's surface. Their mouths were moving in unison, and this time faintly, sound began to come through. "The door opening tomorrow. Find the key." The 11th photo uploaded automatically. It showed Madison alone in the parlor, holding up 11 fingers, but behind her, the tall figure was closer now, his shadow falling across her. She looked terrified, and her mouth was forming a single word over and over. "Run. We need to get out of here," Mike said, backing toward the stairs. But when they turned to leave, the staircase was gone. Where the stairs had been, there was now a solid concrete wall, as if the entrance had never existed. Emma spun back to the mirror. "Madison, how do we get out?" In the reflection, Madison was pointing to something on the floor of the parlor. Sarah followed her gaze to the basement floor and saw what she was indicating. A loose stone in the foundation, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Sarah pried up the stone, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was an old brass key and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a letter, written in Madison's handwriting but dated October 13th, 2017, today's date. "If you're reading this, it means I was able to leave this here through the threshold. Time works differently in the parlor. I've been here for what feels like decades, but I can see all the when moments at once. The key opens the door behind the mirror, but Sarah, you can't use it yet. If you open the door now, he'll be able to come through to your world completely. Wait for midnight. At midnight on October 13th, the threshold weakens. That's when you can free us, but you have to do it all at once. All 6 of us together, or none of us at all. Emma, I'm so sorry I left you alone. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. You were never the next target. You're the key. You're the one who can break the pattern, because you choose to look for us instead of running away. The 12th photo will show you what you need to do. Trust the mirror. Trust me. I love you. Madison." The 12th photo uploaded. As Emma finished reading the letter, it showed all 6 girls standing together in the parlor, but now they looked different, stronger, more substantial, and they were all pointing to the same thing, Emma's reflection in the mirror. The staircase suddenly reappeared behind them. "We can leave now," Sarah said, "but we have to come back at midnight." As they climbed the stairs, Emma clutched the key and her sister's letter. In just over 2 hours, she would have to make a choice that would determine not only Madison's fate, but the fate of 5 other girls who had been trapped for decades. And somewhere in that Victorian parlor beyond the mirror, Edmund Blackwood was waiting, growing stronger with each passing moment, ready to claim not just the girls who were already trapped, but anyone foolish enough to try to rescue them. The countdown was almost over. Back in Sarah's office, the team spent the remaining 2 hours before midnight researching everything they could find about Edmund Blackwood and the original Victorian house. Mike had managed to hack into historical databases and genealogy records, while Emma pored over Madison's research notes with new understanding. "Listen to this," Mike said, reading from a digitized newspaper article from 1903. Edmund Blackwood was investigated by local authorities after his daughter Clara's disappearance. Neighbors reported strange lights and sounds coming from the house for months afterward. One witness, a servant named Margaret Hayes, claimed that Blackwood had been experimenting with photographic techniques to capture the essence of the departed. She said he had converted the basement into what he called a temporal laboratory. Emma looked up from Madison's notes. Madison wrote about this. She said Blackwood believed he could use photography to trap souls, to keep them from moving on. But he needed young subjects, girls on the cusp of becoming women, because their life force was at its strongest. Sarah checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. "We need to go back down there soon." "But Emma, you don't have to do this. Madison's letter said you're the key, but that doesn't mean you have to risk your life." "Yes, it does," Emma said firmly. "Madison spent 14 years trying to find a way to warn us. She figured out how to send those photos, how to leave that letter. I'm not abandoning her now." As they prepared to return to the basement, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number that shouldn't have been possible, Madison's cell phone, which had been disconnected for 14 years. Sarah answered cautiously. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was Madison's, but older, strained. "Sarah, can you hear me? The connection is getting stronger as midnight approaches. Listen carefully. When you open the door, he's going to try to take Emma instead of releasing us. You can't let him touch her. The key will only work once, and if he gets Emma, the door seals forever. Madison, how are you calling me? Time works differently here. I'm calling from every phone in every house where we lived all at the same time. Sarah, there's something else. My parents. Did they ever tell Emma what really happened the night I disappeared?" Sarah glanced at Emma, who was listening intently. "What do you mean?" "I didn't sneak out. I didn't go to the house. He came to me. He appeared in my bedroom mirror at exactly 3:33 a.m. and told me I had a choice. Come willingly or he would take Emma instead. I chose to go, but Emma was only 11 then. Now she's 25, too old for his usual pattern. That's why he's getting desperate. That's why the timeline is accelerating." Emma grabbed the phone. "Madison, I'm here. I'm coming to get you. Emma, you have to promise me something. If anything goes wrong, if it looks like he's going to trap you too, you run. You leave us behind and you run, do you understand?" "I'm not leaving you again." The line went dead. At 11:58 p.m. they descended back into the basement. The mirror was glowing brighter now, and the Victorian parlor was clearly visible in its reflection. All 6 girls stood waiting, but now Edmund Blackwood was visible too, a tall man in a Victorian suit with eyes like black holes and fingers that ended in camera lenses. Emma approached the mirror with the brass key. In the reflection, she could see a small door built into the parlor wall, almost hidden behind an ornate cabinet. "Remember," Sarah said, "all 6 at once, or not at all." At exactly midnight, Emma stepped forward and pressed the key against the mirror's surface. The glass rippled like water, and suddenly her arm passed through into the parlor. The brass key clicked into an invisible lock, and the hidden door swung open. But instead of the girls running toward the door, Edmund Blackwood moved faster than humanly possible, lunging toward where Emma's arm protruded into the parlor. His camera lens fingers stretched toward her, ready to drag her through completely. Madison threw herself between Blackwood and Emma, and the other girls followed suit, forming a human barrier. But Blackwood's inhuman strength began pushing through them. "Now!" Madison shouted. "All of us now!" Clara, Mary, Janet, Susan, and Lisa ran for the open door, passing through one by one in flashes of light. But Madison remained, holding Blackwood back even as his fingers began to close around her throat. "Madison, come on!" Emma screamed. "I can't. If I let go, he'll follow you through." Sarah made a split-second decision. She drew her weapon and fired directly at the mirror. The gunshot shattered the glass into thousands of pieces, and the parlor scene exploded into chaos. Madison came tumbling through the breaking mirror, landing hard on the basement floor, solid and real and breathing. But as the mirror fragments fell like rain around them, they could hear Blackwood's inhuman shriek of rage, echoing from somewhere beyond the broken glass. And written in the dust on the basement floor, letters appeared, as if traced by an invisible finger. "This isn't over." Emma helped Madison to her feet, Her sister looked exactly as she had at 15, unchanged by 14 years in the threshold between worlds. The others? Madison asked weakly. Through the basement windows, they could see 5 figures walking away from the police station into the night. Each girl appeared to be the age she would have been if she had lived her full life. Clara as an elderly woman, Mary middle-aged, Janet, Susan and Lisa at various adult ages. They were finally free to continue the lives that had been stolen from them. But as the Parker sisters embraced, none of them noticed the small shard of mirror glass that had embedded itself in the basement wall, still glowing faintly with that cold, otherworldly light. Edmund Blackwood's influence over Cedar Falls wasn't entirely broken. It was just contained, for now. The aftermath of Madison's return was more complex than anyone had anticipated. While the Parker family rejoiced at having their daughter back, the reality of explaining her unchanged appearance after 14 years proved nearly impossible. Officially, the police department classified it as a case of recovered memory and mistaken identity. Madison Parker had been found suffering from severe trauma-induced amnesia, believing she was still 15. But Sarah, Emma, and Mike knew the truth. And more importantly, so did Madison. 3 days after her rescue, Madison sat in Emma's apartment, staring at her reflection in a handheld mirror. She looked exactly as she had at 15, but her eyes held decades of knowledge and pain. "I remember everything," she told Emma quietly. "Not just the 14 years in the parlor, but all the years I watched you grow up through the threshold. I saw you graduate high school, go to college, get your first job. I saw Mom and Dad age and grieve. I was there for all of it, but I couldn't reach you." Emma wiped away tears. "Madison, what was it like, those 14 years? Time moved strangely. Sometimes a day felt like a year, sometimes a year felt like a minute. Blackwood kept us in that parlor because he fed on our longing to return home. The stronger our desire to escape, the more power he gained. But he made a mistake with me." "What mistake?" "He assumed I would break like the others did eventually. But I had something they didn't. I had you looking for me. Every time you visited my MySpace page over the years, every time you talked about me, it gave me strength. The other girls had been forgotten by the world, but I was still remembered. That's how I learned to manipulate the digital threshold to send those photos." Mike had been monitoring internet activity related to the case, and what he found was disturbing. "Madison's MySpace profile is gone," he reported, "completely wiped from the servers. But that's not the strangest part. I've found evidence that similar profiles have been created for other missing persons cases across the country. Girls who disappeared decades ago, suddenly having social media accounts that update themselves." Sarah felt a chill. "You think Blackwood's influence is spreading? I think we only broke his connection to Cedar Falls. But the concept, the method, it might be replicating itself in other places where similar disappearances occurred." Madison nodded grimly. "In the parlor, I could sometimes see through to other places, other versions of the same room. Blackwood wasn't the only one. There are others like him, and they're all connected through the threshold spaces. We may have saved Cedar Falls, but we might have also taught them how to use modern technology to reach victims." Over the following days, reports began coming in from other police departments around the country. Missing persons from decades past were suddenly appearing on social media platforms, their profiles updating with impossible photos. The Cedar Falls incident had somehow catalyzed a nationwide supernatural awakening. Sarah received a call from the FBI, specifically from Agent Victoria Reeves, who specialized in unusual cases involving technology and unexplained phenomena. Agent Reeves had been tracking similar incidents for months, but the Cedar Falls case was the first where someone had actually been successfully rescued. "Detective Chen, we need your team's expertise. We're seeing activity in at least 12 other locations across the United States. Missing girls from the past century are all trying to communicate through digital means. Something is coordinating this, and we think it started with your mirror incident." Madison overheard the conversation. "It's not coordination," she said. "It's liberation. When Sarah shattered the mirror, she didn't just free us from Blackwood. She tore a hole in the threshold itself. All the other trapped souls felt it, and now they're trying to follow our example." Agent Reeves arrived in Cedar Falls that evening, bringing with her case files from around the country. The pattern was consistent, but accelerating. In Salem, Massachusetts, a girl who disappeared in 1692 had appeared on Instagram. In St. Augustine, Florida, a missing person from 1875 was posting on TikTok. In New Orleans, a victim from 1925 was sending messages through Snapchat. The problem, Agent Reeves explained, is that most of these attempts are failing. Without someone on this side who knows how to help, like Emma did for Madison, these souls are just creating digital noise. But that noise is attracting attention from things that should stay hidden. Madison studied the case files with an expression Sarah had never seen on a 15-year-old's face, the weight of terrible knowledge. "They're getting desperate," Madison said. "The entities like Blackwood are losing their power sources as the trapped souls learn to fight back. That makes them dangerous in a different way. They'll start taking victims in the present, rather than waiting for the traditional patterns." As if summoned by her words, Emma's laptop chimed with a notification. But this wasn't from a vintage social media account. This was from a brand new Instagram profile that had just been created, Cedar Falls Next. The profile had no posts, no followers, just a single profile picture that made everyone in the room freeze. It was a photo of Emma, taken from outside her apartment window, but something was wrong with the image. Emma's reflection in the window showed not her adult self, but a 15-year-old version of her, wearing clothes from 2003. The caption under the profile read, "The threshold remembers all debts. One soul returned requires another soul given. The contract is not complete." Madison grabbed Emma's hand. "He's coming for you. Not in 20 years, not following the old pattern. Now." Through the apartment window, they could see their reflections in the glass, but the reflections were moving independently, showing them trapped in what looked like the same Victorian parlor, with Edmund Blackwood's shadow looming behind them. The rescue had been successful, but it had also painted a target on everyone who had been involved. And this time, Blackwood wasn't playing by the old rules. The Cedar Falls Next Instagram profile began posting every hour on the hour, each image more disturbing than the last. Photos of Emma at work, Emma at the grocery store, Emma sleeping in her bed, all taken from impossible angles, as if the photographer was standing inside mirrors or reflective surfaces. In each image, Emma's reflection showed her 15-year-old self, gradually becoming more transparent with each post. "It's a countdown," Madison explained, her voice tight with fear. "He's slowly pulling your present-day self into the threshold while replacing you with your 15-year-old self. When the process completes, you'll be trapped like I was, and the younger version of you will disappear entirely." Agent Reeves had set up a command center in the Cedar Falls police station, coordinating with supernatural investigation units across the country. But their resources were stretched thin as similar incidents exploded nationwide. "We've got reports of mirror manifestations in 17 cities now," Agent Reeves said, studying multiple laptop screens. "Whatever barrier was holding these entities back has been completely shattered, but Cedar Falls seems to be the epicenter. If we can stop Blackwood here, it might calm the activity elsewhere." Mike had been working around the clock trying to trace the source of the Instagram posts. "The images are being uploaded from everywhere and nowhere," he reported. "The metadata shows locations that don't exist, IP addresses that route through mirrors in antique shops, reflective surfaces in museums, even puddles of water after rain. He's using any reflective surface as a gateway." Sarah had barely slept since the investigation began, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. She returned to Madison's original research, spread across Emma's coffee table like pieces of a complex puzzle. "Madison, in your notes from 2003, you mentioned that Blackwood needed young subjects because of their life force. But Emma is 25 now. Why is he able to target her?" Madison looked up from where she'd been studying the Instagram posts. "Because of the connection we established when she helped rescue me. Emma put part of herself through the threshold when she used the key. He can follow that connection back to her, but more importantly, he can access her memories of being 15. He's not taking present-day Emma. He's pulling her 15-year-old self forward through time." Emma felt dizzy as the implication hit her. "So, I'm not just going to be trapped. I'm going to stop existing as an adult entirely. Unless we can sever the connection," Madison said, "but I don't know how." The answer came from an unexpected source. Sarah's phone rang, and the caller ID showed a number from 1903. When she answered, the voice was that of Clara Blackwood, the first girl who had disappeared. "Detective Chen, I hope you can hear me. The 5 of us who escaped are still connected to the threshold, but we're free to move through time now. I'm calling from the night before I disappeared using my father's telephone. I know how to stop him. Clara, how is this possible? When you shattered the mirror, you didn't just free us, You gave us access to all the moments we missed. I can exist in 1903 and speak to you in 2017 simultaneously. Listen carefully. My father's power comes from a single source, the original photographic plate he used to first capture a soul. He keeps it in his basement laboratory. It's the master template for all the threshold spaces. If you can destroy it, all his connections will be severed permanently. Where is this photographic plate? It's still in the basement of where our house used to be. The city built the park on top, but the basement remains. There's an entrance through the old storm cellar hidden under the memorial bench. Sarah looked at Agent Reeves, who had been listening. We need to get to that park, now. But when they checked Emma's Instagram feed, the latest post stopped them cold. It showed Emma standing in the park at the memorial bench, but this Emma looked younger, maybe 18. The post was time-stamped 5 minutes in the future. He's forcing the timeline, Madison realized. The process is accelerating. We have maybe an hour before Emma is completely pulled back to 15 and disappears into the threshold forever. They raced to the park, arriving just as the streetlights flickered on in the October evening. The memorial bench sat innocently over the spot where the Victorian house had once stood, but now Sarah could see what Clara had mentioned, a barely visible seam in the ground where an old storm cellar entrance had been sealed over with concrete decades ago. Mike used a sledgehammer from the police vehicle to break through the concrete seal. Beneath was a set of stone steps leading down into darkness that seemed to move and writhe like a living thing. The basement connects to all the threshold spaces, Madison warned. Once we go down there, we'll be in his domain. He'll have every advantage. Emma checked her phone. The Cedar Falls Next profile had just posted again. Now she looked 17 in the photo. I don't have a choice, Emma said. Let's go. As they descended into Edmund Blackwood's original lair, they could hear whispers echoing from the stone walls, the voices of every soul he had ever trapped, crying out for freedom. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a basement that seemed to stretch impossibly far in all directions, filled with antique photographic equipment and hundreds of mirrors in ornate Victorian frames. And there, in the center of it all, was Edmund Blackwood himself, no longer hiding in shadows. He stood beside an enormous camera on a tripod, its lens focused on a chair where a 15-year-old version of Emma sat motionless, her eyes blank and staring. "Welcome," Blackwood said, his voice like the sound of breaking glass. "You're just in time for the final exposure." Edmund Blackwood stood taller than any human should, his Victorian suit immaculate despite existing in a basement for over a century. His face was gaunt and pale, but his eyes held the terrible intelligence of something that had fed on human souls for generations. The camera beside him was unlike any photographic equipment Sarah had ever seen. Its brass fittings gleamed with an otherworldly light, and the lens seemed to contain swirling darkness. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience," Blackwood said, his voice echoing strangely in the impossible basement. 6 souls, collected over a century of careful work, all released in a single moment of foolish heroism. But every business has its losses, and I've learned to adapt. Emma stared at her 15-year-old self, sitting motionlessly in the chair. The younger Emma's eyes were open but empty, as if her soul was already partially separated from her body. "Let her go," Emma demanded. "Your quarrel is with me, not with her." Blackwood laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "My dear, you still don't understand. She is you. This is the moment when your timeline splits. In one reality, you continue to exist as you are now. In the other, your 15-year-old self is trapped here forever, while your adult consciousness simply ceases. I'm offering you a choice, the same choice I gave your sister 14 years ago." Madison stepped forward. "Emma, don't listen to him. There has to be another way." "Oh, but there isn't," Blackwood continued. "The threshold demands balance. 6 souls released requires 6 souls returned. Your friends cannot leave this basement until my collection is complete." He gestured to the mirrors lining the walls. "Each mirror leads to a different threshold space. Your detective friend might find herself in 1952, experiencing the disappearance of Agnes Mueller in Detroit. Your technical specialist could end up in 1967, joining the fate of Patricia Chen in San Francisco. Your FBI agent might discover what really happened to the missing girls in Salem, 1692. Agent Reeves had been quietly studying the basement while Blackwood spoke. Now she whispered urgently to Sarah. "The photographic plate Clara mentioned, it has to be in that camera, if we can destroy it while he's focused on Emma." But Blackwood's hearing was unnaturally acute. "The original plate? You mean this?" He reached into the camera and withdrew a glass photographic negative, larger than any standard size. Even in the dim light of the basement, they could see that the plate contained not one image, but hundreds layered on top of each other. The faces of every soul he had ever captured, all trapped within the glass. 137 young women spanning 2 centuries, Blackwood said proudly. Each one perfectly preserved at the moment of their greatest potential, their most vital essence. Breaking this plate would indeed free them all, but it would also release that accumulated life force all at once. The resulting explosion would level half of Cedar Falls. Mike checked his phone. Emma, the Instagram post stopped. The last one showed you at 14. Emma felt a strange lightness in her limbs, as if she was becoming less solid. Her memories of college, her first job, her adult relationships, they were growing fuzzy, distant, as if they belonged to someone else. The process is nearly complete, Blackwood observed. Soon your adult self will fade entirely, and your 15-year-old consciousness will take the chair willingly, just as Madison did all those years ago. But Madison had been studying the setup while he spoke. Emma, look at the mirrors. Really look at them. Emma forced herself to focus despite the growing confusion in her mind. In each mirror, she could see different scenes, different time periods, different locations. But in every reflection, she saw the same thing. Herself, at 15, sitting in that chair. Not just one version, but dozens, maybe hundreds. He's been trying to capture me for years, Emma realized. Every time I researched Madison's disappearance, every time I visited her MySpace page, I created a connection he could exploit. All these mirrors show different attempts to pull me in. Precisely, Blackwood smiled. Your sister was merely the bait. You were always the prize. A soul that spans 25 years of growth, experience, and determination. Your essence will power my threshold spaces for centuries. Agent Reeves had been slowly moving closer to the camera, while Blackwood focused on Emma. Now she was close enough to see the photographic plate clearly. There's something else on this plate, she whispered to Sarah. Look at the top corner. Sarah squinted at the glass negative. There, almost invisible among the layered faces, was an image that didn't belong. Edmund Blackwood himself, but younger, more human. And beside his image was a woman who looked remarkably like him. That's his wife, Madison said, her voice filled with sudden understanding. Clara mentioned her in the research. Elizabeth Blackwood died in 1896, a year before he built the house. She was the first soul he captured. He's not just collecting young women for power, he's trying to bring her back. Blackwood's composure cracked for the first time. Silence. You know nothing of what I've sacrificed, what I've endured. That's why you need so many souls, Sarah realized. Elizabeth died as an adult. You need the accumulated life force of multiple young people to restore her to full existence. But it's never enough, is it? She's still just an image on a photographic plate. Emma felt herself growing even more insubstantial, but the revelation gave her an idea. If her adult consciousness was fading while her 15-year-old self was being pulled forward, maybe she could use that temporal connection to her advantage. I'll make you a deal, Emma said, her voice sounding younger than it had moments before. I'll take the chair willingly, but first, let me speak to Elizabeth. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Elizabeth cannot speak. She exists in a state between life and death, preserved but not conscious. Then wake her up, Emma challenged. If you truly love her, if this is all for her, let her choose whether she wants to be brought back through the suffering of innocent girls. For a moment, the only sound in the basement was the soft humming of supernatural energy flowing through the mirrors. Then, Blackwood placed his hand on the photographic plate, and the image of Elizabeth Blackwood began to glow with soft light. When Elizabeth spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filled with a century of anguish and regret. Edmund, my beloved fool, let them go. Let me go. This was never what I wanted. Elizabeth Blackwood's voice filled the basement with the weight of decades of sorrow. As her spirit manifested more clearly within the photographic plate, her image began to move independently of the glass surface, stepping partially out of the negative, like a figure emerging from deep water. Edmund, look what you've become, Elizabeth said, her form translucent, but gaining solidity with each word. When I died of consumption in 1896, I begged you to let me go peacefully. Instead, you trapped me in that first photograph and then spent over a century collecting the souls of innocent girls to try to bring me back fully. Blackwood's composure crumbled completely. Elizabeth, my darling, I did it all for love. I couldn't bear to lose you. These girls, they were nothing compared to what we had. They were everything to someone else. Elizabeth's spirit flared brighter. Clara was our daughter, Edmund. Our own daughter. And you trapped her first, used her as practice for your twisted experiments. Emma felt her consciousness stabilizing as the truth emerged. The emotional shock of Elizabeth's revelation was disrupting Blackwood's concentration, weakening his hold on the temporal manipulation. Madison moved closer to Emma's chair. Clara Blackwood wasn't just the first victim randomly chosen. She was his daughter. That's why the house was built in 1897. It was meant to be a family home. But when Elizabeth died, he became obsessed with bringing her back. Agent Reeves seized the moment of Blackwood's distraction. She lunged toward the camera, grabbing the photographic plate before he could react. But instead of trying to destroy it, she held it up so Elizabeth's spirit could speak directly to her husband. "Edmund, if you ever loved me, you'll end this now," Elizabeth pleaded. "I've watched you destroy so many young lives. I've felt every soul you've captured, their pain feeding into mine. This isn't love, it's selfish madness." Blackwood reached out toward Elizabeth's spirit, but his hand passed through her form. "I can make you solid again. Just a few more souls. Just a little more life force." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "I want to rest, I want peace, and I want you to free every soul you've captured, starting with our daughter." The mirrors around the basement began to flicker and change. Instead of showing different threshold spaces, they now displayed moments from the past. Elizabeth and Edmund's courtship, their wedding, the birth of their daughter Clara. But they also showed the progression of Edmund's obsession after Elizabeth's death, his first experiments with spirit photography, and the terrible night in 1903 when he had taken his own daughter. "You see?" Elizabeth turned to Emma and the others. "He wasn't always a monster. Grief made him this way. But grief doesn't excuse what he's done." Emma found that her 15-year-old self in the chair was beginning to respond, blinking and showing signs of consciousness. The temporal split was reversing as Blackwood's concentration continued to waver. "There's only one way to end this," Elizabeth continued. "The plate must be destroyed, but not by violence. It must be released willingly, by someone who understands the choice between holding on and letting go." Sarah understood immediately. "Emma, she's talking about you. You have to choose to let go of your 15-year-old self, to accept that growing up means leaving some things behind forever." Emma looked at her younger self in the chair, the girl who had believed in simple answers, who hadn't yet experienced loss and disappointment, and the complex pain of adulthood. Part of her wanted to stay in that chair, to remain 15 forever, to never have to face the grief of Madison's disappearance. But another part of her recognized that growing up, even with all its pain, had given her the strength to save Madison. Her adult experiences, her adult connections, her adult determination, these were what had made the rescue possible. "I choose to let go," Emma said clearly. "I choose to stay 25, with all the pain and growth that comes with it." The moment she spoke those words, her 15-year-old self in the chair smiled peacefully and began to fade away. But instead of disappearing, that younger version of Emma transformed into pure light that flowed into the photographic plate, not to be trapped, but to release the others. The plate began to crack as the accumulated life force of 137 souls found a willing conduit for escape. But instead of exploding outward destructively, the energy flowed upward, carrying with it the spirits of every girl Blackwood had captured over the centuries. One by one they appeared in the basement. Clara, Mary, Janet, Susan, Lisa, and dozens of others, spanning 2 centuries. They looked at Edmund Blackwood with expressions not of anger, but of profound sadness. "Daddy," Clara said, appearing as the young woman she should have grown up to be, "it's time to let go. Mama is waiting for you, but not here, not in this place of suffering you've built." Edmund Blackwood aged rapidly before their eyes, the supernatural energy that had sustained him for over a century finally dissipating. His Victorian suit became dust, his unnaturally tall frame shrinking to human proportions. In moments, he was nothing more than an elderly man collapsing to his knees in the basement that was already beginning to crumble around them. Elizabeth's spirit moved to her husband's side. "Come with me, Edmund. Leave this place. Let these people return to their lives." As husband and wife faded together into whatever lay beyond death, the basement began to collapse. But the mirrors had changed once more. Instead of showing threshold spaces, they now showed exits, ways back to the surface, paths home. Emma grabbed Madison's hand, and together with Sarah, Mike, and Agent Reeves, they ran toward the nearest mirror. As they passed through its surface, Emma felt the strange sensation of stepping not just through space, but through time itself, returning to the moment when everything could still be made right. They emerged from the mirror in the police station basement, but this time the basement was just a normal storage room. The Victorian mirror was gone, replaced by a small memorial plaque that read, "In memory of those who were lost, and in gratitude for those who were found." Outside, dawn was breaking over Cedar Falls, and for the first time in over a century, October 13th would pass without anyone going missing. In the days following Edmund Blackwood's final passing, the supernatural activity that had plagued multiple cities across the United States began to subside. Agent Reeves coordinated with law enforcement agencies nationwide, reporting that the mysterious social media accounts of long-missing persons had gone quiet. The threshold spaces that had connected different locations and time periods had collapsed with the destruction of the original photographic plate. But the most remarkable change was in Cedar Falls itself. The town felt lighter somehow, as if a weight that had pressed down on it for over a century had finally been lifted. People walked more freely. Children played later into the evening, and the memorial park where the Blackwood house had once stood became a genuinely peaceful place where families gathered for picnics and community events. Madison's integration back into the world of 2017 proved challenging in ways no one had anticipated. Physically, she remained 15 years old, but mentally and emotionally she carried the experiences of 14 years in the threshold space, plus the memories of watching the world change through supernatural observation. The state eventually agreed to a complicated legal arrangement that granted her adult status based on her unique circumstances, allowing her to live independently while officially being classified as a temporal displacement case, a designation that had never existed before. "The hardest part," Madison told Emma as they sat in Emma's apartment one evening, "isn't the technology or the cultural changes. It's knowing that Mum and Dad aged 14 years grieving for me while I stayed the same age. When I see them now, I can see all that pain in their faces, and I know it's because of choices I made." Emma shook her head. "Madison, you saved yourself and 5 other girls. You found a way to warn us and guide us to the solution. That pain in Mum and Dad's faces isn't your fault. It's Blackwood's." Through the window they could see the memorial park in the distance. Sometimes, on clear evenings like this one, Emma thought she could see figures walking peacefully among the trees. The spirits of Clara, Mary, Janet, Susan, and Lisa, finally free to exist in their own time and space, without the burden of being trapped between worlds. Sarah had been promoted within the Cedar Falls Police Department, partly in recognition of her work on the Madison Parker case, though the official report bore little resemblance to what had actually happened. She now headed a special unit that investigated cases involving unusual digital evidence and temporal anomalies, a designation that allowed her to handle similar supernatural cases should they arise. Mike had left law enforcement entirely, founding a consulting company that specialized in digital forensics for cases involving paranormal activity. Agent Reeves had recruited him for several federal investigations of supernatural phenomena, and his expertise in tracking ghostly internet activity had proven invaluable. But it was Agent Reeves herself who brought disturbing news 3 weeks after the Blackwood incident. "We thought the collapse of the threshold spaces would end the supernatural activity nationwide," she explained during a video call with the Cedar Falls team. "And it has mostly. But we're seeing something new. Instead of missing persons from the past trying to communicate, we're getting reports of people in the present suddenly remembering lives they never lived." Sarah leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "A woman in Portland woke up last week with complete memories of growing up in the 1920s, including detailed knowledge of family members who died before she was born. A teenager in Miami started speaking fluent Spanish from the 1800s, despite having no exposure to the language. It's as if when all those trapped souls were released, some of their experiences scattered and attached to random people." Madison had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. "It's not random. When Emma chose to let go of her 15-year-old self to free the others, she created a template for release that those souls could follow. But 137 people's worth of memories and experiences don't just disappear. They have to go somewhere." Emma felt a chill. "Are you saying that pieces of all those girls' lives are now living in other people?" "Not exactly," Madison said thoughtfully. "More like their stories needed to be completed. They were all taken before they could live full lives. Now those unlived experiences are finding ways to be experienced, even if it's through other people." Agent Reeves nodded grimly. "That's our theory as well. We're calling it temporal bleed-through. Most cases are harmless, people suddenly knowing how to play instruments they never learned, or having emotional connections to historical events they weren't alive for. But some cases are more problematic. She pulled up a case file on her laptop. A man in Seattle has been behaving as if he's Clara Blackwood's brother, a brother she never had, but apparently dreamed about having. He's been trying to contact the Blackwood estate, looking for property that was sold off decades ago. He has no rational explanation for his behavior, but the memories feel completely real to him. Emma and Madison exchanged a look. They had both experienced the strange sensation of memories that didn't belong to them during their time connected to the threshold spaces. "Is there anything we can do to help these people?" Emma asked. Agent Reeves shrugged. "We're still figuring that out. Most of the affected individuals are adapting well. They're essentially living richer, more complex lives with additional skills and knowledge. But for the ones who are struggling with the dissonance between their original memories and their new ones, they need to understand what happened to them," Madison said. "They need to know that what they're experiencing is real, even if it didn't happen to them personally. These aren't false memories. They're inherited experiences from people who couldn't complete their own stories." Sarah had been thinking about the implications. "Madison, you spent 14 years connected to the threshold spaces. Do you have any insight into whether this temporal bleed-through will continue?" Madison was quiet for a long moment. "I think it depends on whether the people experiencing it accept these new memories as part of themselves or try to fight them. The ones who embrace the additional experiences will probably stabilize and live normal lives. The ones who resist—" She didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. People who couldn't accept the reality of their situation might become unstable, potentially dangerous. As the video call ended and Agent Reeves promised to keep them updated on new developments, Emma realized that their victory over Edmund Blackwood had been complete, but it had also opened up entirely new questions about the nature of memory, identity, and what it truly means to live a full life. Outside, night was falling over Cedar Falls, and the memorial park was peaceful under the streetlights. But across the country, hundreds of people were going to sleep with memories of lives they had never lived, dreams of experiences that belonged to girls who had been stolen from the world over a century ago. The story was far from over. In some ways, it was just beginning. 2 months after the Blackwood incident, Emma discovered that the temporal bleed-through phenomenon was more personal than anyone had realized. She was organizing Madison's rescued research materials when she found a photograph she had never seen before. A family portrait from 1902 showing Edmund and Elizabeth Blackwood with a young girl who was unmistakably Clara. But there was a fourth figure in the photograph, standing slightly apart from the family. A woman in her 20s who bore a striking resemblance to Emma herself. "Madison, look at this," Emma called out, holding up the photograph. Madison studied the image carefully. "That's impossible. This photo was taken 15 years before Emma Parker was even born. But that woman looks exactly like me," Emma finished. "How is that possible?" Sarah arrived at Emma's apartment that evening to find both sisters staring at the mysterious photograph with a mix of fascination and growing unease. When Sarah saw the image, her detective instincts immediately kicked in. "We need to research this woman. If she was connected to the Blackwoods in 1902, there might be records." Their investigation led them back to the Cedar Falls Historical Society, where the elderly librarian, Mrs. Henderson, examined the photograph with keen interest. "Oh my," she said softly, "I haven't seen a photograph of Margaret Hayes in decades. She was a fascinating woman, worked for the Blackwoods as a governess and companion to young Clara, but she left their employment abruptly in late 1902, almost a year before Clara's disappearance." Emma felt a strange chill. "Do you have any records of why she left?" Mrs. Henderson disappeared into the archives and returned with a folder of yellowed newspaper clippings. "Margaret Hayes was something of a local mystery herself. After leaving the Blackwoods, she claimed that Edmund was conducting unnatural experiments with photography and mirrors. She tried to warn people, but no one believed her. She left Cedar Falls in early 1903 and was never heard from again." Sarah studied the clippings. "So she suspected what Blackwood was planning before he actually took Clara?" "It appears so. According to her final interview with the Cedar Falls Gazette, she claimed that Blackwood had shown her photographs that moved on their own, and that he had spoken of capturing the essence of the living to restore the essence of the dead. She was particularly concerned for Clara's safety." Emma stared at the photograph again. The resemblance was undeniable, not just facial features, but the way Margaret Hayes stood. Her expression, even her posture, mirrored Emma's own mannerisms. That night, Emma experienced her first temporal bleed-through dream. She found herself standing in the Blackwood house in 1902, but not as a visitor or observer. She was Margaret Hayes, caring for young Clara, while growing increasingly suspicious of Edmund's late-night activities in the basement laboratory. In the dream, Emma Margaret discovered Edmund's first successful spirit photograph, an image of Elizabeth that seemed to move and respond when viewed in candlelight. She realized that Edmund was planning to use Clara as a conduit to bring Elizabeth back from the dead, and that Clara's own life force would be consumed in the process. Emma woke up with perfect clarity about events that had happened over a century ago, and with knowledge she shouldn't possess about the layout of the original Blackwood house, the location of hidden passages, and most importantly, about a warning Margaret Hayes had left behind. She called Madison immediately. "I know where Margaret hid the evidence. She documented everything Edmund was planning, but she hid her records somewhere. They would be safe until someone could use them to stop him." "Emma, you're scaring me. How could you possibly know that?" "Because I am her somehow, or she was me. The temporal bleed-through isn't random. It's connecting people across time who share the same essential purpose, the same drive to protect others." Following the knowledge from her dream, Emma led Madison and Sarah to the old cemetery behind St. Mary's Church. There, behind the tombstone of Margaret Hayes, who had apparently died in 1953 at the age of 73, they found a small metal box buried exactly where Emma's inherited memories said it would be. Inside the box was a detailed journal documenting Edmund Blackwood's experiments, complete with photographs of his early spirit captures, diagrams of his threshold apparatus, and most crucially, a letter addressed to whoever comes next to face the darkness. The letter, written in Margaret's careful handwriting, revealed that she had experienced prophetic dreams about the future, dreams that showed her a young woman who looked exactly like her would one day be instrumental in stopping Edmund Blackwood's century-long reign of terror. "I have seen you in my dreams," the letter read, "a woman who bears my face but lives in a time I cannot imagine, when moving pictures are sent through the air and knowledge travels faster than horses. You will be the key to saving Clara and all the others who come after. I leave you this record so that when the time comes, you will understand the full scope of what Edmund has planned." The journal revealed that Edmund's ultimate goal had never been just to resurrect Elizabeth. He had been building a network of threshold spaces across the country, connected through mirrors and reflective surfaces, with the intention of creating a supernatural domain where he and Elizabeth could rule over the trapped souls of hundreds of young women. He was building a kingdom of the dead, Madison realized, and we stopped him just before he completed it. But the most disturbing revelation was in the final pages of the journal. Margaret had discovered that Edmund's experiments with time and spiritual energy had created a temporal loop, events that were destined to repeat until someone with the right combination of knowledge, determination, and supernatural sensitivity could break the cycle permanently. Emma understood now why she had been able to help Madison, why her adult consciousness had been strong enough to resist Blackwood's temporal manipulation, and why Margaret Hayes had looked exactly like her. They weren't separate people. They were the same soul, existing at different points in time, working toward the same goal across more than a century. "So the temporal bleed-through isn't a side effect," Sarah concluded. "It's the universe's way of ensuring that the right people are in the right place at the right time to prevent tragedies like this from happening again." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of inherited purpose settling over her. Across the country, people were waking up with memories of lives they hadn't lived, but those memories weren't random. They were being distributed to individuals who could use that knowledge to protect others, to recognize supernatural threats, to ensure that Edmund Blackwood's century of evil would never be repeated. The story of the missing girls was finally complete, but Emma realized that her role in protecting others from similar fates was just beginning. Margaret Hayes had spent her life trying to warn people about supernatural dangers. Now Emma would carry on that mission, armed with the knowledge of someone who had seen the threat firsthand and the power of someone who had successfully defeated it. As they walked back from the cemetery through the peaceful streets of Cedar Falls, Emma felt the presence of all the freed souls around them, not as ghosts or trapped spirits, but as guardians, ensuring that their hometown would never again be a place where young people disappeared into the darkness. The threshold between past and present had been sealed, but the connections forged across time would endure, creating a network of protection that spanned generations. 1 year after Madison's rescue, Cedar Falls celebrated its first October 13th in over a century, without a disappearance. The date that had once been dreaded by the community had transformed into something else entirely, a day of remembrance and gratitude. Emma stood in the memorial park, where the Blackwood house had once cast its shadow over the town. A new monument had been erected, not to commemorate the missing girls, but to celebrate their freedom. The names of Clara Blackwood, Mary Sullivan, Janet Mills, Susan Carter, Lisa Thompson, and Madison Parker were engraved in stone, but beneath them was an inscription that read, "Found and freed, October 13th, 2017. Madison approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the local cafe. At 16 now, having finally begun aging again when the temporal effects were broken, she looked more at peace than Emma had ever seen her. "Agent Reeves called this morning," Madison said, handing Emma a coffee. "The temporal bleed-through cases have stabilized nationwide. Most people have successfully integrated their inherited memories and are living normal lives. The few who struggled have been helped through therapy programs she developed based on our experiences here." Emma smiled. "And the other cases? The supernatural investigations?" "Quiet for now, but she thinks what happened here created a kind of template. If similar entities exist in other places, people will be prepared to recognize and stop them before they can build the kind of power Edmund accumulated." They walked through the park together, past families enjoying the autumn afternoon, children playing on the swings that no longer moved with ghostly motion, couples sitting on the memorial bench that no longer bore the weight of supernatural sorrow. Sarah approached from across the park, accompanied by Mike and a woman Emma didn't recognize, a young teacher who had recently moved to Cedar Falls from Portland. Emma noticed that the newcomer had an old-fashioned way of speaking and seemed to know details about the town's history that weren't common knowledge. "Emma, Madison, I'd like you to meet Jennifer Walsh," Sarah said. "She's experiencing some temporal bleed-through from Clara Blackwood. She has memories of growing up here in the early 1900s, and she's asked to be involved in our ongoing research." Jennifer smiled warmly. "That's strange, having memories of a childhood I never lived, but also wonderful in a way. Clara was so curious about the world, so eager to learn. Through her memories, I feel like I understand the importance of what you all did. She wanted me to thank you." Emma felt a familiar tingle of supernatural awareness, but it was different now, warmer, protective rather than threatening. The network of connected souls that had formed during their battle with Edmund Blackwood continued to exist, but now it served to help rather than trap. Over the past year, Cedar Falls had become something of a pilgrimage site for people experiencing temporal bleed-through. They came seeking answers, understanding and connection with others who carried memories that weren't originally their own. Emma had found her calling in helping these individuals understand and integrate their inherited experiences. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you all," Emma said, as they gathered around the memorial stone. "I've been having dreams about other places, other times. Not memories this time, but visions, I guess. I think there are more situations like Edmund's, but they're different. Some are benevolent spirits, trying to communicate with the living. Others are more dangerous." Sarah nodded. "Agent Reeves mentioned that the FBI is forming a permanent task force for supernatural investigations. She wants our team to head the civilian consultation division." Mike grinned. "So we're officially ghost hunters now." "We're protectors," Madison corrected. "We help lost souls find peace and stop malevolent entities from harming the living. It's what Margaret Hayes tried to do over a century ago, and what we'll continue doing for whoever needs our help." As the afternoon wore on and the others gradually left the park, Emma and Madison remained by the memorial stone. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grass, but they were natural shadows now, unmarked by supernatural menace. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked. "Choosing to come back instead of staying 15 forever?" Madison considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to skip all the difficult parts of growing up. But then I think about Jennifer and the others who carry pieces of Clara's memories and Mary's dreams and Susan's curiosity. Our pain and growth don't just belong to us. They become part of something larger, something that helps other people live fuller lives." Emma nodded, understanding. The temporal bleed-through had taught them that no experience was ever truly lost, that every moment of joy and sorrow contributed to a greater human story that connected across time and space. As they walked home through the twilight streets of Cedar Falls, Emma reflected on how much had changed. A year ago, she'd been a young woman haunted by her sister's disappearance, spending her nights staring at a frozen MySpace profile. Now she was part of a network of individuals dedicated to protecting others from supernatural threats, carrying the inherited wisdom of Margaret Hayes and countless other souls who had faced darkness and chosen to fight. Her phone chimed with a message from Agent Reeves. New case in Savannah, Georgia. Historic house, missing persons dating back to the Civil War era, recent social media activity from impossible sources. Team deployment in 48 hours? Emma showed the message to Madison, who smiled with the expression of someone much older than 16. Ready for the next adventure? Madison asked. Emma looked back at the memorial park one last time. In the gathering darkness, she could see faint figures walking peacefully among the trees. Not trapped spirits, but free souls choosing to watch over their hometown. Clara waved at them from beside the swing set, and Margaret Hayes nodded approvingly from near the memorial bench. Ready, Emma said, and together the Parker sisters walked toward whatever supernatural mysteries awaited them, carrying with them the knowledge that some bonds transcend time, death, and the boundaries between worlds. The story of the teen last seen on MySpace in 2003 had finally ended, but the story of those who protect the living from the dangers that lurk between worlds was just beginning.